Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are finishing up our little journey through A24 films for the past month, and we are wrapping up with Beau Is Afraid. Okay, Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for Beau Is Afraid? This should be a very interesting one.
Okay, it is. Following the sudden death of his mother, a mild-mannered but anxiety-ridden man confronts his darkest fears as he embarks on an epic, Kafka-esque odyssey back home.
Oh, interesting positioning.
Right?
I remember reading some other summaries of this film before watching it that described it as sometimes something along the lines of like sometimes your greatest fears lead to the best adventures. I was like, well, that's one way to
Yeah.
position this.
Yeah.
Far more positively than the experience that I had, man.
Yeah, I described it to a friend after watching it
How did
as
you?
the Odyssey, but it's just a dude going to his mom's house.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Which
I feel like that
it can
sums
feel
it
like
up.
an odyssey for
Yeah.
sure. But at the end of the day, if you boil it down, yes, that is what happened. I would have loved to see their facial expression as that landed, and
Yeah.
settled in.
Yeah, because I was trying to, because like they asked me about my viewing experience, and I was like, okay, before I tell you about my viewing experience, let me tell you about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Give you a baseline of what this is. Yeah.
Which I think they still won't know what they're in for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't think anything you could say to anyone would ever prepare them. So,
No, definitely not. Because I knew that I was watching this before you, there were so many times that I opened up my phone to try and text you to like
yeah.
warn you, and like I was not prepared for this movie, but I was like, okay, what could I say or do to help Jen prepare for this experience? And I came up with nothing, which is why you did not receive a text from me. But I thought
Yeah.
about it. I tried to think about like, okay, what could I say to be helpful? And nothing came to mind. So
Yeah.
I'm
Just
sorry.
brace yourself. You
Yeah.
did, I remember, text me once. I think it was, and I appreciated it so much when the scene happened. It was the first like 20 minutes of Pieces of a Woman. You were like, do not
Oh,
be
yeah.
eating any snacks. Don't be
Yep.
eating your lunch while watching. First 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Afterwards, eat away, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But the
Yep.
first 20 minutes, and I was watching that scene, I was like, oh, yes, I'm
Mm-hmm.
very grateful that I was
I
forewarned.
learned that the hard way because often I'll put a
I think,
movie on and I have my foot like I will schedule my viewing experiences around my meals. And so
Mhm.
it's just, we're knocking
That's
out
good.
two things at one time. Yeah, no, I regretted all of my life choices during those first few minutes.
Oh man. I think this is also a movie for anyone that's listening. Also, I mean, you could eat during this, but I might recommend not just for your digestive system to really be able to do its thing.
Yeah, I think it depends on what time you're eating because I definitely ate during this.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, and that was fine. But like I my meal was over by the time things got totally unhinged at the end. So
Okay,
I was
good.
okay. Like,
Good.
so if you're going to eat during this movie, make sure it's in the first
Like
hour,
yeah. Yeah,
30
third hour,
minutes.
first hour, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. When the screen goes to black for about 10-15 seconds, end your meal, because we go somewhere
Yeah.
else is all I'll say, and
Yes.
we're not in Kansas anymore for sure.
No, definitely not.
No, so you leave you and your bowl of pasta back in Kansas, okay? All right, let's start off with our one sentence summaries for Beau Is Afraid after this great intro. What was
Okay,
yours?
mine is guilt and cool new drugs lead to a wild trip.
I love the many layers of that. That's
Thank you.
great. The
Thank
double
you.
meaning. My one sentence summary is you'll never love your own nightmares more. Man,
Yeah, you're not wrong.
yep. It's puts a lot
Mhm.
into context for you for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start off with our initial thoughts and our kind of overview of our perspectives about Beau Is Afraid. And this is definitely a movie that should not be spoiled for you. So we will include a spoiler before we continue talking about this movie in the second half of this episode. So I was thinking the whole time while watching this movie, I really am curious what Sarah's thoughts about this are. So the moment of truth, Sarah, what did you think about Beau Is Afraid? Did it work for you?
See, I'm also curious about what my thoughts are. I don't know how I feel about this movie.
I love when this happens. This is my favorite kind of episode.
See, I don't. Because I I appreciate the attempt, and I
Hmm.
really like a lot of the creativity. I loved the cinematography in this so much. I really like some of the creative choices that happen in the middle of the film and the different types of like visual styles that you get to see during one scene. Loved it. Ate all of that up. Um, there's also just fun little things happening in the background of every scene. And so
Yes.
I felt like I was playing like I Spy while watching this movie. And that's just a great time. So I really liked that part of it. But I didn't know what we were doing in this movie. And so I was just confused for 3 hours. And uh I really struggled with that because I thought that the movie was doing one thing and I kept waiting for that to be made evident and it never was. And so I I still have no idea what this movie was about. Like what were we doing? What
Oh.
actually happened here? What was the resolution? Like what was this? We go on this crazy fantastical journey and I'm not mad about a fantastical journey, but I just I don't understand what happened. And there's so many like
Mm.
symbols and repeating motifs throughout this film that I kept like making note of and I was like, "Ooh, yes, this is going to pay off in the end." And
Mm.
it didn't.
Hmm.
And so I'm just I I don't know. I don't know about that. Like I couldn't even rate it on Letterboxd. Like I sat there for so
Interesting.
long with my phone in my hand going, I don't know how many stars to give this movie, and I still don't.
Wow. Wow.
So,
Why is that though?
I
Why?
don't know.
Because
I think
the
because I
lack
don't get
of,
it. So,
but
like,
isn't that inherently a wouldn't that lean towards a lower rating? Like it did not
not
transfer over to
not
you.
necessarily. Just because I also know that I'm not great at metaphors, and so I don't necessarily wanna hold that against a movie if I didn't get it.
Mm.
Uh, I don't know, like, I really liked portions of it, but I just I don't know. I didn't get it.
I have a question for you.
Yes, I have an answer for you.
I was thinking about Bardo so much throughout this film.
Yes. Oh, I love Bardo.
And that one you loved, and there seemed to be meaning and purpose, and there was direction, and there was significance for you that you loved. And,
Mhm.
it's also super wild and out there and fantastical, but it seemed
Mhm.
to potentially have better framing in a way that was setting you up well to receive it. And so I'm
Yes.
curious if you put Beau Is Afraid in conversation with Bardo, similarities and how they contrast with each other. Like unpack that for me because I was thinking about that movie so much, which is why I was curious if this worked for you as well because Bardo really worked for you.
Mhm. And that's something that I was thinking about after the movie was over because Bardo just worked for me. I loved that movie. I would happily watch that again. Had a great time. Uh I would not watch Beau Is Afraid again. Um and I think one of the differences between the two films is that Bardo, we had these touch points with reality, and then we would go into these crazy, fantastical, surreal moments, but then we'd come back to reality. So I felt like I was on firm footing and I could come back down to earth and I knew what was real and what wasn't. And that was something that doesn't happen in Beau Is Afraid. And
Not at all. Yeah.
so I for me that detracted from my experience because the whole time then I'm going like I see what's happening on the screen, but what is actually happening? And the film never answers that. So then I'm left confused of like, okay, did all of this actually happen? It couldn't because it's so weird, but the film never shows me what actually happened. And to me that led to a more disconnected viewing experience, whereas with Bardo I was all in. I was like, yes, you can take me wherever you want to go, I'm along for the ride. Beau Is Afraid, I was trying to figure it out the whole time because I didn't know what was real and what was not.
Interesting. Interesting. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, Bardo does this push and pull between reality and fantasy. And so you see all of the moments of fantasy and how that is meaningful or exaggerates or accentuates things that you know to be true about that character who you know as a person in reality. Beau Is Afraid, yeah, to me feels like wandering through. Actually, we're not even wandering. We're like barreling through the
Yeah.
horrifying subconsciousness of someone who has experienced so much and is dealing with so much anxiety and trauma and childhood fears and all this stuff. Like we are truly, we're not in Kansas anymore. Like we are in Oz and we're staying in Oz and we're going deeper into Oz. It actually reminds me a lot of I think it was a the live action Pinocchio that we watched a couple years ago during one of the Oscar seasons of like
Oh,
descending
yeah.
into this world that is absolutely chaotic and you meet all kinds of things and people along the way. Uh, and I think that had, because this is where it doesn't really work for me as well either, is that they all feel like the imaginations of and the inner world of someone who is real, but I wished we had a little bit more time to ground in that so that everything else that follows feels significant and meaningful back to little moments that we'd experience with that person. Whereas with this, I'm like, I've truly, this feels like I'm experiencing a nightmare on the screen. You know, like we are lost in the world of subconscious and like I am ready to wake up.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I had forgotten about that live action Pinocchio, but there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
similarities between the two for sure.
Yep. Yep. Like we are sucked into a world and there's movies not interested in going back at all. In fact, the ending of the film is the ending of what most of our nightmares are, which is it's the final moment where we think we're going to die and then that's the moment that we wake up, right?
Mhm.
I think what makes this movie interesting that I was thinking about a lot is the way that a lot of the imagery and the choices of like visuals and where and what happens feel very significant to what that the real Beau must be experiencing, and this is like the visual portrayal of those things. So I don't want to give too much away, but there's a specific that scene at the very end that we can talk about of being exposed and the way that he feels exposed and in front of so many that I think is like significant to these like underlying fears. So it's this movie really does feel like the visual representation of our fears and anxieties come to life and evoking what that feels like. And so it's more of a mood piece in a lot of ways than it is a character driven film. Whereas I think Bardo is incredibly character driven and is very concerned about this person that we're following, you know?
Mhm. No, that's a really good distinction because I think that was one of the things that I struggled with is I wanted each of these things that we go through to tell me something, whether that's like what we're actually doing or who this character is, like we know that he's guilty, like, or he feels guilty. We know that he struggles with anxiety. He has a strained relationship with his mother. That's I
That's
that
it.
that kinda
Yeah.
sums up the character, and so
Mhm.
I think I wanted, because the film feels so intentional with the things that it includes, I wanted those to have a bit clearer meaning of what I was supposed to take away from it.
Mm.
There's a lot of, like, recurring moments of water and a bathtub and different things like that, and I was like, I don't understand what some of these things are supposed to mean to this character, what I'm supposed to learn about this character through this symbol, because it was just walking through his nightmares. Like that that's a really good way to sum up what this is we spend 3 hours in a dude's
In a
nightmares.
nightmare. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Love it.
Sweet. But I think perhaps what is could work about that, maybe not for me personally, it sounds like not for you personally, is that the fact that Beau is kind of an unnamed protagonist in a lot of ways, like he is just a vehicle for us to experience his psyche and these fears and these traumas and stuff. Like there is a projection of ourselves or like a because he's such a cardboard character that we can superimpose ourselves onto a lot of that and just go through the experience of what it feels like to be carrying these weights in a way that you aren't able to maybe when it is a real grounded character that is three-dimensional, right? Like it's the Beckett um method or tool where we know nothing about Beckett, therefore we kind of feel like we are Beckett too, going through the experience. Didn't work in that movie. Arguably, maybe that worked for some people in Beau Is Afraid. Didn't work for me, but there is an interesting experience that I felt with that, which is that some of these fears, in a lot of ways, are universal, and perhaps that was part of the point too for making Beau just Beau. And we don't know much about Beau, and so therefore, like we can perhaps be Beau as we go through this awful experience.
I don't want to be Bo.
Ah, me neither, man.
I think that was part of it too, is
I don't
like,
want to be
I
Beau.
get it, so that we could, like, put ourselves in the
Yeah.
character's shoes, yada, yada, love it, great. I was like, I would like to take my shoes or my feet out of these shoes and go
Yes.
on to a different journey, please. Like,
Yes.
can I return my ticket and get a refund?
Mm-hmm. I would like to wake up now.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, one thing that I wanted to mention is that the length is I mean, this is very long. This is a
It's
3-hour
very
long
long.
nightmare. It is so long. I I personally think that this film would have worked better for me if it was tighter. If this was a 2-hour experience and we went through a lot of the, chapters of his story, the stops along the way in Odysseus' journey, had we gone through those a little bit more efficiently and then them having been a little bit more punchy, I think I would have liked this a lot better. And would have been willing to engage a little bit more. I think by the middle of the film, like the middle of act two of this, at the like hour and a half mark, I was like, oh my gosh, this feels really exhausting to me. I think the first hour actually was my favorite. I loved it. I loved every bit of it. I was so excited for what this film was going to do. But when we get to essentially the second chapter with the family and their home, that just lasted so long that it felt a little bit like a slog. And so that last hour and a half, I had so much trouble getting through. I think I stopped and started it so many times. So I think that if this was more efficient and punchy and tighter, it would have worked significantly better for me.
No, I agree. I think that this should be a 2-hour movie, not a 3-hour movie,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I again, I think your comparison to Pinocchio is pretty apt, because one of the reasons why we struggled so much during that movie, or at least I remember struggling, is it just felt like we were meandering with
Mm,
not a clear sense of purpose. And though Beau has purpose in this, he's trying to get to his mother's house, it feels very meandering. And I think the 3-hour runtime really contributes to that. Whereas I think if it was a little bit shorter, a little bit tighter, there would be more of that sense of purpose and that sense of momentum rather than just kind of, I don't know, it slowly moving from chapter to chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a way we are wandering.
Yes.
We're wandering through a lot of horrifying things, but we are
Yeah.
wandering. And I actually think that, to your point, the anxiety that tension could create of like, I just gotta get there, like it's already been 24 hours, it's already been 48 hours, like that anxiety could have been used as a really great forward propulsion for the plot, just from like a storytelling perspective, but also in communicating this sense of mounting guilt and anxiety that he also feels, which is what we know to be true. But did we feel that same sense of, I just got to get there because I feel her, disapproval growing, and I feel the guilt growing as every minute and hour passes. I think that could have been a really great like engine for this film to really land to the explosive ending that we get when he does finally get to his mother's house.
And
It
we
gives like a
we
missed
get a
opportunity.
yeah, we get a little bit of that, but I don't feel like we get enough of it,
Not enough.
or maybe it
Yeah.
doesn't come at the correct times.
Hmm.
And then I feel like we get a lot of that in like 30 minutes and then no more of that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's some interesting choices are made in this film for sure.
Yes. Okay, so let's unpack some of those more deeply. If you haven't seen Beau Is Afraid yet, go in blind with this one. We recommend checking it out. It's available to rent or buy on multiple streaming platforms. And now we will have full reign over all of the plot of Beau Is Afraid. Where would you like to go first? What stood out to you? What was noteworthy?
I don't even know.
Let's go through. Let's start from the beginning. I think there are really three acts to this in a lot of ways. There's multiple chapters along the way, but it feels like we are in the city for the first hour. Then we go on to many different places in the second hour, and in the third hour we spend most of it at Mama's house. And I think that out of those three three acts, the first to me feels the strongest in the film, landing that really great balance of things are not as they seem. There's little bits of humor in there. There's an effective way that they've portrayed the anxiety and the guilt that Beau feels, and I think it's ironically the most grounded as well. So that could be part of why I loved it so much. But I think it is such a great setup. And at the end of that first hour, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be in for this. Like I didn't expect to love this so much, but I'm strapped in. Like let's go on this ride. And when we transition and that the whole second hour just feels like a lot escalates. And I found myself beginning to disengage. Part of it is because there's so much that's so out there. And my brain was so overstimulated and trying to unpack all of the metaphors and whatnot and visuals and what they all represent. But I think that it starts to get away from itself a little bit. And again, we talked about it not being as tight. So therefore we languish in certain of those scenes and places for a lot longer than I would have expected. So I'm curious, out of those three act structures, which really worked best for you as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the part of this film here, I'm gonna not answer your question in my answer. Are you ready?
I'm
Uh,
used to it by now. No, I'm just kidding.
it's true.
It's the
I'm
best. No,
very
it's the
good
best.
at non-answers.
Yes.
Um, the part of this film that I was the most engaged was
Mhm.
in probably one of the weirder bits where he is in the forest and then he walks through
I
that
knew it.
field
I
and
knew
goes,
it.
I know. It's
You ate it up.
I
You
did.
ate it up.
I did, and it was purely because of the visuals. Because the whole time I was
Yes.
going, "I don't understand what this is, but I love the way this looks, so I'm not mad at
Mhm.
it."
Yep.
It got me because it's so
It did.
artsy-fartsy and fun, and there's so many different styles and mediums that are used in that portion. Oh, it's glorious. I loved it. Don't know what it means. Don't know how it connects to anything else in this film, but I enjoyed that little bit. Um, but the rest of the film, I was pretty disengaged. Uh, because I was trying to figure it out is my problem. I was just trying to figure out the movie. So even in the beginning, because so much was made of the very cool new drug that his therapist prescribes to him, I was like, okay, is he just on a bad trip? And so I wanted to see, or like, is this medication mixing with something else that he took? Like, even from the jump, I was wondering what is actually happening, and what is he experiencing versus what is the reality. And so I think that was the lens through I watched the entire movie through. So even in the beginning, I was still like, okay, is this actually happening or is he just imagining this? And I struggled because I was just confused almost from the jump.
That would be an infuriating recurring thought to be having through this movie. Is this
Mhm.
happening or is it not? Oh my gosh.
And
And
so like the whole
waiting to get
time I
back
was
to, is it gonna get
yeah.
grounded or not? Yeah.
Yes, that was
Yeah.
my experience the whole time. Just like, what
Mhm.
is reality? So there were so many moments throughout that I was like, okay, is he so when he was with the family, for that what felt like a very long time, I
Mhm.
was like, okay, is this a like mental institution? Is he just imagining this and these are other patients and these are the doctors who are keeping him like I
Ah,
created
I
this
see. You
whole
created a
thing.
whole,
Oh,
yes.
Jen, I was trying to figure out what this thing meant. And so I was like, okay, this is
I
just
love it.
what he's experiencing, but this is not reality. So what could reality actually be? And that was what I was doing the entire
The
movie.
entire time I would have loved to watch this movie with you and just heard your, like, what does this just a wildly out there thing that's happening
Yeah.
on screen, like, what could this be in reality? Like, let's
There
map these. That would be so fun.
there's a moment at the end when he was in the boat and the way that his hands and arms were positioned, I was like, oh my gosh, he's wearing a straitjacket in real life.
Oh my
Just because of the way that he was sitting and he couldn't move his arms. I was like,
god.
"Oh, he's in a straitjacket in real life. I'm so ready for this to cut back to reality," and that's what he's doing.
And it
Nope,
and it never does.
did not.
Oh my.
It's fine.
What did you think that the, forest segment was?
I couldn't make sense of that. I didn't know. I
He
had
wandered
nothing.
into,
I was
um
just confused.
he wandered into a movie theater and is
Sure.
projecting himself
Yeah.
onto this piece of art.
Yeah, or he wandered into like a community production. I don't know.
Of, like,
Of
of
something.
Greece and was like,
Sure.
"Surely this is my life too?"
Yeah. Why not?
Oh my. I
Yeah, I
mean, at a
couldn't make
certain
sense of it.
I love that even to the end, the final moments of the film, like, you did not give up hope. You were
I
like, "Surely
yes.
this will all connect back
I
somehow."
needed something. That's what I needed a device to help me understand this movie. I needed this to be
Mm,
framed a certain way so I could make sense of it because
yeah.
on its face, it did not make sense to me. It still doesn't make sense to me.
Mm.
I unless we think of it as a nightmare.
That's the thing I had to tell myself about. I think it was like 30 minutes into the scene when we were in the family's home, where I was like, this man is asleep, but real
Mm.
Beau is in his bed. He had a
Safe,
long day at work. He might have had too much caffeine before bed. He drank that cup of coffee when he shouldn't have.
ate some
Or
weird
maybe he
pizza.
had an espresso martini at his work happy hour event. And and he is just about to wake up the next morning exhausted as he
Mm.
heads into his work. Like,
Honestly, I like this. I will accept this. That is this movie.
but also I'm concerned for his mental sanity after
Yes.
experiencing if this is his subconscious. Although in reality, like if we think about our dreams and nightmares, they feel a lot like this in a lot of ways. I hope they're not. I mean, sometimes they are wild, and random people from your life like show up in your dreams. People that you care about that are significant to you show up in your dreams and kind of reveal these like underlying subconscious fears that you have. So I'm analyzing real life Beau through his nightmare, being like, let's unpack. You've clearly got some family trauma that we should probably
Mhm.
work through. You're
Yeah.
probably going to therapy, but you're hesitant to share a lot because you are worried that your therapist is out to get you too. Like there's just everything seemed to point to subconscious fears that this human has.
I love that. Yes, that is exactly what this movie is. Yep, cosign. Agree. Now the movie makes sense.
Perfect. This is why Bardo doesn't work for me because I'm just like, oh, but we are now in the real world, so this
Mm,
is not a dream. But then we are in a dreamlike
gotcha.
sequence, but then this is not a dream, and I'm like, I can't explain this.
Mm, mm. That makes
But
sense.
probably
I totally
emotionally, that
understand.
film works better overall. That's the net
Yeah,
effect.
yeah, and I think it has to do with what you said earlier that it's so character
Yeah,
driven.
yeah.
You know?
Whereas this is not at all.
No.
He could be. He's an everyman. He could be
Hmm.
anyone.
Yeah. Yep.
Hmm.
Has some
It's
really
fascinating to see a lot
interesting.
of the conversations and commentary about this film. Uh, just exploring like how much of this is Ari Aster's, like personal musings and desire to express these things in and of himself. Just like
Mm, mhm.
how much can we piece this together as um a portrait of what this person, this creator, this artist is interested and captivated by, all this kind of stuff too, which I just thought was like a interesting interesting way to view this film. I didn't view it that way, but I don't blame them for doing that, right? Because anything a person creates is an expression of something that they're captivated by. And so there's clearly something here too as far as understanding Ari Aster as a creator that is fascinating. This is what he's looking to put into the world and wanted to create an evocative portrait of fear and guilt and anxiety that perhaps is underlying in him, or the experience of going through that is was important to him to express.
Mm, mhm. No, that's interesting to think about. I also hadn't really thought about that. I was just too confused. I was like, I don't get it.
Look, I don't get it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. This is an interesting choice, though, given Hereditary and Midsommar, his two other films.
Uh-huh.
'Cause this is very different from those.
Yeah, I
Uh,
haven't watched Hereditary, but I was thinking about Midsommar during
mhm.
this, and I'm curious because you've watched both Hereditary and Midsommar, what your thoughts are in this kind of being in conversation with those other two.
It's so different. I was surprised. I expected this to be more horror-y, because I mean, Hereditary and Midsommar are both very clearly horror films. Um, I can see how there are horror elements of Beau Is Afraid, but this is not in the same class, I think, as those other two. So I really struggled with like what genre is Beau Is Afraid because I'm not sure. Uh, and I was surprised at how funny this movie was to me. Uh,
Yes, can we talk about that for a second?
yeah, it's hilarious, and I didn't expect it at all.
Mhm. Mhm. Me either. I think that the a lot of the humor worked for me really well in the first act. I think the second act maybe I was just trying to understand too. But there's a lot of really great moments in that trial scene at the end as well. Of him
Mhm.
just being, like, put on blast and flamed for these, like, tiny little things, like, and his mother was looking for him, and Beau, knowingly from the second floor, just, like, this tiny little memory from his past getting replayed, and I thought that that was surprising to me, is the dark humor that's littered throughout this movie. I didn't feel as much of it in the second act, to be honest.
Yeah, I think because so many of the situations were so out there, I just laughed. Like, I don't know if it was just, like, a defense mechanism because I was uncomfortable, or if I actually found certain parts really funny, but I I think that certain
Probably
moments,
both, yeah.
the premise was just so out there, or it's these little details. So, like, when they're at the family's house and they're doing the puzzle, but it's of their
Yeah.
deceased son. Like, what? Like, things like that are littered all throughout this film, and it's just these wild moments that I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is hilarious to me," because I never would have thought of something like that. So yeah, all of that dark humor that I wasn't prepared for, but I did
Or when
appreciate.
she's supposed to be saying grace, and
Yeah,
she's just staring at the shrine to her son, and it is, like, a long pause,
so
and her
long.
husband's like, "And amen?" Like, "We're done now, right?" Oh, man.
Wild.
It was really wild. There's a lot of, like, you mentioned these little things in the background too, which I think I wish I had more brain capacity, honestly, to take them all in, but for example, all of the K-pop posters in Tony's room, or the
Mm.
little signs along the way as Beau is wandering through these different worlds. Like, I just wish I had more time to like dwell on those, but we got to keep going because we're wandering. Um, but there's so much visually in the background. It felt very Wes Anderson-esque in that way, and that there's a lot to take in all of the details of the set and the place that we're wandering through.
No, I loved that. I loved all of those little details. They were so fun. And like to see around Beau's apartment, there was a lot of like adult movie theater, like adult shops, all of these
Oh
things, and seeing the names of the shops were hilarious to
yeah.
me. Uh when he was in the house, Nathan Lane's character is reading like a tabloid magazine at one point, and the headline says something to the effect of like 15 celebrities that wanted to be buried face down, and it was after he had learned about his mother's death. So it's just these little
Oh,
things that I was like, "Oh my gosh, all of these things were created so intentionally." And they're humorous, but some of that intentionality in other parts, I was like, "Okay, so like what does that mean though?" Like I loved the humorous parts, but I wanted more meaning in certain things, I think. But
yeah. Once
if it's
again, your
all
brain is like, make it, and then
yeah,
now what?
yes.
What
If
does
it's
this
all a
all mean?
nightmare though, then that's fine.
Yes, it's all a nightmare.
Then we're good. I don't have to
It's
worry
a
about
mood
any of this.
piece. It's a
Yeah.
mood piece to experience
Yes.
guilt and shame and anxiety and fear.
Absolutely.
A colorful concoction.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Absolutely.
I thought that one thing that really worked well for me, and I think is like a image that is going to be ingrained in my brain, is the last 30 minutes of the film where he leaves his mother's home and finds himself in an arena being put on trial. I just thought that that was such a visually evocative way to showcase that feeling of being exposed. And for a man that we've seen for the last 2.5 hours experience so much fear and shame, like this is his worst nightmare to have. Not only is it like now personal in and of himself that he experienced these things, and the it's not now not just a personal relationship where he feels like this has come to light with his mother, but now it is like on display for everyone to see on all of the ways that He's failed since childhood. Like that that raising of the stakes and the stakes being such a direct um attack on the thing that he is most afraid of, I just thought was such a evocative way to showcase what that that greatest fear for him must really be. Not only that he believes that he himself is not good enough, but that now everyone can see and he's being exposed in that way. I just thought that that was such a again dreamlike way to visually showcase the like visual manifestation of what our fears are coming to fruition. um and just visually, like he is this tiny little dude in his tiny little rowboat with these giant screens replaying these things that he has been afraid of or embarrassed about since he was a child, and everyone, there's like a giant crowd of spectators. Like, how horrifying would that be for anyone, let alone for a man who is clearly racked with guilt about this? Like, just the visualization of that I thought was fabulous. I ate that up.
I love that. I love that. Because again, I was trying to figure it out because I didn't realize that we
mm.
were in a nightmare. Uh,
Mm. What was your theory?
well, I was just confused. Like, I was like, okay, did you
Who
actually
are
kill
these
your
people?
mom and now you're on trial? Like,
I see.
what? Like, again, just utter confusion and did not make the connection that this was just a metaphor of his guilt. So there I am being bad at metaphors.
No, I
Uh,
think we both had coping mechanisms as
we
we went
sure
through
did.
this 3-hour traumatizing experience. And yours was to turn it into a puzzle, as we know that you love to
As
do,
as I do.
and detective your way through it. And mine was to be like, ah, it all does not ground in reality anyway. It's surrealist. It all doesn't matter. It's okay. Real Beau is
Hmm.
living his normal life.
I love that. I was also thinking about because he had a lawyer on
Oh,
his
yeah.
side that
Oh,
kept
interesting.
being silenced. And so then that got me thinking about our criminal legal system and how if you have money, then you can navigate that system a lot more easily and a lot more effectively. Whereas Bo doesn't have a lot of money. And so he would not see. So if he did kill his mother, he would likely have a public defender representing him, and they are criminally overworked and not paid enough. And so that whole scene got me derailed on
Oh.
our criminal legal system. So I was I was way off the deep end in another universe during that scene.
This is good. Like this is this is the purpose of art. It's to stimulate our brains. Our
Yes,
brains were
absolutely.
stimulated.
In very different ways.
So I would deem this a smashing success.
Nailed it. Woohoo!
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Other things that we wanted to talk about.
That's a great question. Most of my notes are just
What the heck is
what
going on?
is this?
Yeah.
Uh
Okay. I had one thought
yeah.
that I'm curious your perspective on, which is the animated sequence.
Yes.
I was intrigued to see if perhaps there was a meta point that was trying to be made there around like the way that we as audiences consume like art and storytelling specifically, because he goes from being an audience member that stumbled upon this play to realizing that somehow this play is also about him. I think there's a moment where he stands up at the end and he exclaims, "This is my story."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Oh, I wonder if Ari Aster is making just like an interesting point here around how much we see ourselves or put ourselves into the stories that are being told to us, but also so much of that play that then becomes that animated sequence is kind of this like distillation of so many of the narratives we've told in general around what living a life looks like. There's that whole bit in the beginning in the first half around him tending to the land and providing for himself and building a home and taking care of his family, and then there's this whole bit around like romance and finding a partner and raising a family. Like there's these, it's like the traditional ways of how to live a life that is kind of being distilled and told to him, and then he kind of stands up and exclaims that this is my story. So I was intrigued to see if perhaps there is some intentional meta commentary that's happening there around the way that we put ourselves into the things and the stories that are being told to us.
I love it. Yes, absolutely. Because again,
Where did your
I
brain go?
my brain was just so I loved the animation. I loved the way
Ah,
that it
okay.
looked. And then he came back and had 3 sons, and I was like, "Wait a second, this doesn't make sense to me."
Yeah, I was confused by that too.
You know, like, so
Hmm.
I wasn't necessarily thinking about it as a metaphor. I was trying to figure out what it meant for real Beau rather than seeing it as like this bigger thing. But now that you say that, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, yes, that makes all the sense in the world." That
Mm,
that's what that scene means, and even how we bring our desires to these different works of art, cuz like he was so repressed in his relationships, and he had never been with a woman, was never going to have kids because of what his mother told him, like all of that. And so he had this
yeah.
desire to be intimate, this desire to have a family, uh, which he obviously brought with him to this experience of this play. There's probably a lot there to
Mm-hmm.
think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. I didn't quite take notice of this film's movie poster until after watching the movie. And it's not the movie poster that I would have expected for this film, because that there are, of course, a lot of flashbacks and flashing back and forth in time, but it feels super significant that this movie poster chooses to include these like four versions of Beau at multiple times in his life, from a young boy all the way to the old age that we see him as in that animated sequence. So I don't know what to make of it. And clearly, like, our brains are just trying to compute this movie, but that feels like a significant detail as far as the way this movie is looking to be framed to the public around how to consume the wild ride that we go on. You know, it feels like a key to
Hmm.
something.
Yeah, yeah, and I wonder if there is an attempt to like show how the anxieties that he feels are pulled through all of these different generations and
Mm,
all of through these very different circumstances that he finds himself in.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Oh, there's something there. Like, just like we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of where I came to at the end of this
Yeah.
movie was I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts about this film other than the ones that we have shared and expressed to date?
Uh
We
I
hit
would
them
like
all.
to give a shout out to his mother's house. It's gorgeous. I wanted a whole tour of his mom's house
Yes.
because it's just fantastic. I wanted to spend some time in there. Maybe not with her, uh,
Oh
but
no.
maybe not with Beau either, honestly. If I could just
Oh
get
no,
like
none
a
of them.
neutral third party, if I could get a realtor to just show me the house, I think that that would be a great time.
What about Stephen McKinley Henderson?
Honestly, I would take that too. He is a
Yeah,
joy. He is a
seems fine.
national treasure.
Yeah,
Uh yes, I would happily tour that house with him.
yeah. He seemed like a fun dude.
Mhm. That'd be great.
Just chill. Good
With
vibes.
his cute therapist sweater action that he had going on.
Yes.
I I
Although
I was digging it.
I I love the reveal of like Bo's therapist and his mom colluding together. I
Yeah.
just thought that's like every person's worst nightmare. Like to have all of that replayed about the people that you've been expressing your deepest, darkest, innermost thoughts to from
Yep.
your therapist, like, how horrifying to realize that those 2 parts of your life
Yeah.
are, have been working together all these years.
Yeah, during that section,
Oh, it's so
I
good.
kept thinking about, like, okay, is this the Truman Show meets Mommy Dearest? Like,
Oh.
is that what we're going with
That would
here?
be
Like,
great.
that
I
was
mean, not
kind
great
of
for him, but
no.
wild to think about.
But I was
Very
'cause
entertaining.
again, I'm trying to figure out this movie, not realizing that it's not what I think it is.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow, was his mom really like surveilling him to this degree? Did she really pay off his therapist? Because then that's making me feel some type of way about this therapist who I thought was good in the beginning because he asked some good questions. So it was, I wasn't quite sure what to do there. It's like, oh
No.
no, this poor man being in the Truman Show with a horrid mother controlling
Yeah.
everything behind the scenes. Like, that's pretty
Yeah.
terrifying.
Mhm. Mhm. Shout out to Joaquin Phoenix. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
incredible actor. What an impossible role to somehow to figure out how to do.
Yeah.
But I found his vulnerability that it brings to Beau as he experiences all these things like really, really great. I think there's a version of this that is just pure, you know, pure fear. And there's like you see the inner child in Beau that just is looking for safety and looking for peace and um, for love, like in adult Beau. And it's a lot in Joaquin Phoenix's eyes, which she notoriously just does so well. But I think it worked really well for a film like this too. So I thought that was really, really great. Joaquin Phoenix bringing it as always. Are we surprised?
No, not at all. I was surprised, however, that young Beau was not like CGI'd Joaquin Phoenix, but that is an actual
Mm.
person.
Which I was like, they did really well casting this
Right?
person. Like,
Wow. I
or
yeah.
those two actors are really great at landing the same wavelength of
Mhm. Mhm.
like countenance, the look in their eye, all of that. They just feel so resonant with each other.
Yeah, yeah, that was wild to me. That
Yeah.
that is a completely separate individual. Yeah,
Yeah.
great casting, great acting, fantastic.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, I would love to give a shout out to Prime Video, which is the streaming platform that we chose to watch this because I tapped on my screen to just see how long I had at a certain point in this film. And Prime Video so kindly suggested that the next thing that I watch be Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. And I think they just know what I will need after this. I did not watch this, but a palate cleanser, a lighthearted, frilly palate cleanser to follow up the experience that this movie was. I'm like so intrigued by that recommendation. I have so many questions for their AI recommendation algorithm. And perhaps that's the thing that people need after watching this 3-hour nightmare. You know, just some Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris.
The up next suggestion that I got was Vengeance,
Oh,
the BJ Novak movie that came out earlier this year.
oh my.
So it's a
Yes.
very different film.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So that's your palate cleanser,
Apparently
clearly.
so. Uh, Interesting choices all
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of Beau Is Afraid. You can find it available to rent or purchase on various streaming platforms. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you hung out with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a review letting us know your thoughts about Beau Is Afraid. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at @MoviesAndUsPod or email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week with an exciting few weeks of Scorsese September as we head into October, where Scorsese has one of his big feature films coming out, Killers of the Flower Moon. So we'll be going through a couple of Scorsese's big films over the next couple weeks. And next week, we'll be starting with King of Comedy. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.